So we're going to be painting our middle ground today. So go ahead and unwrap your palette. If you need to get more colors, make sure you just take a dime-sized amount to start out. You're going to want to get a couple of different size brushes, at least one big and one small. You're also going to need your water and your paper towel. So last time we started with the background. It was kind of rough, kind of fuzzy. Today we're going to be working more in the middle ground area. So for me, it's going to be the bridge and the water around the bridge. And then we will get into the closer areas as we progress on. So I'm actually going to start today by touching up things that I'm seeing in my background that I missed last time. So areas of the sky, areas of those trees back there. When you take a break from your artwork and come back to it, you're going to start to notice things that you might have missed when you look back at your photograph and then look at your artwork. Little details that you might have just glossed over. It's pretty easy to do when you start painting. So before I'm starting to work on the middle ground, I'm going to really try to flesh out the background as much as I can, just like we did last time, but going in for a few more little details here and there. And just for your own reference, here's the picture that I'm working from. I pulled this off the internet just because I'm sick, so I didn't have time to go out and grab something. But this is for you to look at why I'm putting paint in certain areas, what effects I'm going for. And like I mentioned in the last video, you start by painting the things that are furthest away from you. So for me, it was the sky, and for many of you, it will be the sky as well, if you can see it. And then next would be the very furthest away objects, so the trees, and then the water that's furthest away. If you have water in your landscape photo, pay close attention to the shapes that you see on the water. I always tell you guys, paint what you see, not what you think you see. So if you're just breaking things down into basic shapes, I'm seeing just big shapes on the water, lines, little white lines, little blue streaks. And again, here I'm trying to add little bits of different colors to create the colors that I see. Not everything's going to be just a pure white or a pure blue hue straight out of the tube. It's got little bits of other colors in it. And if you've got clouds in your photo, one tip that I've found really successful, for me at least, is if you lay down the color that you want on the edges of the clouds and kind of push into the sky a little bit, when you clean your brush off and dry it, you can sort of go back in with your damp brush and just sort of fluff the edges a little bit to give them more of that wispy effect. Now I'm going to work on darkening up the shadows a little bit in the trees in the background. So just looking at my photograph, you can see that the trees have shadows and they're a lot darker than I have them right now. So I'm just mixing some colors to create a nice dark green, trying to get it fairly dark, but notice that I'm not using black yet, and I won't use black until the very end of my landscape painting. Black will just sort of make things look a little bit harsh very fast. So if you can help it, try to just use different amounts of blue, particularly ultramarine blue or bright red, a little bit of both. See what works. See what gives you a darker hue, and then very, very carefully with your small brush, start to work in some of those little darker areas. Now notice the motion that I'm using with my hand and the bristles of the brush. I'm not pressing too hard because we don't want to hurt the brush, but I'm working from side to side and in little circles with not a lot of water on the bristles. That's very important because if you have too much water, it's going to become a soppy mess. So having a decently dry brush and then working in these little different directions will give you a more fuzzy, natural appearance so that your shadows aren't so harsh. Again, your acrylic paint is going to dry up quickly, so you're going to have to make another pile of the color that you're working with. If you know you're going to be working with the color for a long time, make a bigger pile. For me, I'm just doing these little shadowy areas. So I'm just going to make another small pile of color. And then, of course, try your best to recreate the color that you had before. If it's slightly different, that's okay, because not all the colors that you see in nature are going to be identical. But do try to get it as close as possible. So here I'm just going to speed up the footage a lot of me working on background details. Again, it's good to have your background as complete as possible before moving on to the foreground, so I am just going to add in a few more things. I will be going back towards the end of the painting to add ever more details, but again, just try to squeeze in as many as you can. One thing that I will offer as advice that I often forget to do is that whatever you add to your background, if you have water, you're going to be able to see the reflection in the water. And the reflection is just going to come straight down. I like to work the brush from left to right because that's the direction that water ripples move in, so that will give you a more realistic looking reflection. Okay, so now I'm going to start work on the middle ground, and the next closest thing to me from the background is the bridge. So I'm experimenting here with mixing different colors, trying to create the darker colors that I see in the bridge. Now I'm using a method here called the dark to light method. This is a great way to show implied form because you add the darker colors first and then gradually add the lighter colors on top of it. It really makes the colors seem like they're floating out towards you. So I'm just experimenting here, trying to create a good brown. And once I think I've got it, I'm going to just start applying it to the bridge. Now remember that some of your outlines that you drew may get covered up, but what I will say, it's important not to cover up things that have sides and corners. So for example, on my bridge, you can see a little bit of the underneath side of the bridge. I am not going to be covering that up because that is going to have different shadows and highlights than the flat side of the bridge. So think about when we did perspective drawing not too long ago. We had the side that was parallel to the picture plane. It wasn't receding away from us. That's the side right here that I'm painting right now. The sides that are receding away from us towards the vanishing point, those are those little underneath sides of the bridge. I'm not going to be adding this base color to those sides because I don't want to lose them just yet. I want to keep those well established. If you accidentally paint over them, it's okay. You can still go back and find them, but it's good to take precautions. It does take some practice getting the steady hand going around the edges of your structure, trying to get those nice hard outlines. Try different things with holding your brush, with rotating your canvas around to see what works best for you. Again, your wrist wants to move in a side-to-side motion, so try to use that to your advantage. You can also try holding your wrist still and just moving your fingers. Play around on paper for a little bit, see what works, and then go for those harder edges. Okay, so my next step in my dark to light method for painting this bridge is going to be creating the next lightest color that I see on the bridge. So basically I'm using the color that I just used on the whole bridge for my base tone, and then I am just going to add small amounts of other colors, trying to lighten it up just a bit. I might change up some of the hues that I use, because the bridge isn't all the same exact stone color. Stones have variations in colors. So I'm just mixing a few things here, seeing what looks closest to the photograph I'm working from. Make sure that you are comparing the paint that you're mixing to the photograph. That is super important. And then I'm just adding in a little bit of white here, a little bit of yellow. Yellow is another great way to lighten up a hue. Okay, so I think I've got the color that I want, so I'm going to go in here and just start to roughly place the color down where I see it in the photograph. Now, it's good here when you're working on things like stone and wood to have a decently dry brush. So I'm actually going to dry my brush off a little bit here, um, and go back and get a little bit more of that color and just keep roughing it in wherever I see those lighter areas. Here I'm also going to start adding some details to the bridge, which is something that we weren't super concerned about when we were working on the background. Because we're a little bit closer to the foreground now, we want to start thinking a little bit more about some finer details. So I'm going to be adding in pieces of the railing, just trying to establish where they are. I'm going to be adding more detail to them later, but for right now I'm just going to try to get those basic shapes. So here I'm starting to work on the skinnier lines that are in the railing. So this might seem a little bit scary because the lines are thinner, but again, try to just hold your hand as steady as possible. Because we're working so small, we can actually lay our hand on the part of the canvas that is not yet painted, which is another great reason why it's nice to paint the background first. So I'm resting my hand on the bottom part, and then notice the motion that my fingers are doing. They want to move in this back and forth, side to side motion. They don't go up and down as easily. So try this out if you're having some trouble getting nice thin lines, and use just a little bit of paint on your brush, and try to work with a decently damp brush as well. I find that's a little bit easier for getting those skinny lines. Again, since we are dealing with an object that is closer to the viewer than the background, we want to think about those details. You want to try to look for those finer details, those little nuances, especially in man-made structures. They're very angular. They can be pretty boxy. So look for those little moments and try to capture those. Again, painting what you see in your photograph. So now that I've got about 2 coats of paint on the bridge, I'm actually going to go in and create yet another coat that is going to be lighter this time, again working from dark to light. So here I'm mixing a few different colors and trying to recreate those lighter areas that I see on the side of the bridge that is parallel to the picture plane. I'm noticing that this color I just made would work good for a base color for this highlight that I see on the side of the bridge that's receding away from us. So I'm just going to start adding some of that in there. And then using it where I originally intended for the side of the bridge that is facing us. Just wherever I see this lighter gray, just placing it down. So here sped up, I'm just using that drier brush technique, not using as much water. This is really great for things like tree bark, for wood, sides of buildings, and things like that. So really think about using this as you get closer to that middle ground, foreground area. Now again, I'm going in and creating an even lighter gray. I'm still seeing some lighter values than I had already, and I'm going to be adding a few more hues into here because I'm realizing that my color is getting a little bit too gray and isn't quite warm enough. So I'm just going to add a touch more of some reds, some yellows to try to warm those colors up just a little bit. Now using the same light color I just made, I'm going to take this opportunity to fill in some highlights that I'm seeing, some of those really lighter moments in the architecture, reflections in the water especially. Use that extra paint that you feel like you don't need anymore because you're probably going to notice that you do need it in some spots. So really look around at your photograph, see if you're seeing any lighter colors that could use that color that you just made. For me, I'm noticing that the sides of these parts of the railings, I believe they're called the balusters actually, they have these little highlights on the sides of them catching that sunlight. So I'm just going to take that color and apply it to the sides of those where I'm seeing those highlights. Case in point about me forgetting to work on reflections in the water. It's good to work on the reflection while you are working on the non-reflection part because then you can just use the colors that you used on the actual structure. Here I'm sort of demonstrating how to do the light to dark method as opposed to the dark to light. I would choose just one if you have something with a reflection, just so that you have more consistency. I realize that I do like my dark to light method a lot better. Here I'm kind of using that highlight color and blocking those colors in first before going in and adding the darker colors. And I feel like adding the darker first was a lot easier for me. Because of this revelation that I'm having, I realize that I'm just going to use a solid color and do my dark to light method again. And that's completely okay if you do some trial and error. I'm just darkening things up. Noticing that the color that I'm using isn't exactly the same dark color that I used on the top part of the bridge. Again, that's why it's good to work on the reflection while you are working on the actual structure or trees or whatever you are painting a reflection of. Now, because I have this dark color I just made, I'm going to take that opportunity to start filling in some of the more shadowy areas of my structure. So I'm going to be adding a little bit more blue and maybe a little bit more red to that darker color. When you look at the shadows on your structures and on your plants, it's not going to just be the color that you use plus black. You're going to be seeing a few different hues in there. Shadows are all sorts of different colors. So really look at your photograph. Look at it like a scientist. Do you see other colors in there? Do you see little bits of blue, little bits of red? Maybe it seems a little bit more purple. Keep in mind that those little details that you see on the bridge, they don't get lost in the reflection of the water. They might be a little bit blurry and a little bit wiggly, but they're still there, so don't forget to add those in. Just as a reminder, if you are feeling frustrated, take a break from your painting. Walk away from it for a little bit. Stand really far away from it. Look at it upside down. Try to find new ways to look at it. You are sitting very close to it and you're noticing all of those little tiny details. And you might feel frustrated because you're thinking this isn't coming together. But when you stand far away from it, you might start to feel that the illusion is coming together a little bit better. All of those little tiny pieces that make up the painting blur together and things start to look a little bit more realistic. And it's okay to take a break. Just take about a 5-minute break, walk away, change your water cup, repoint your brushes. It's okay to take a breather here and there. Art is not always going to be a fun walk in the park, and I find this especially true with painting. It's challenging, but if you persevere and just stick with it, I find that it's very rewarding as well. When you've been working with a difficult area of a painting that's been a stumbling block for you, if you take a break and come back and then finally beat that area, it's a great sense of accomplishment. Remember that you haven't failed until you've given up and actually walked away. You can take a break as long as you come back and keep trying. Last thing I'm going to do here before I wrap up for the day is just fill in the sky and the water in preparation for next time I paint, so that way I don't have to worry about that so much. So I'm just going to be mixing my blues, laying them down, and that way they'll be there for me when I come back. Aside from needing a few finer details and some touch-ups, the middle ground is roughed out for today, so this is going to be our stopping point. If you haven't finished your middle ground up to this point, you can take your canvas home, you can take your palette home if you wrap it in cling wrap. Just make sure that you sign out a brush by writing your name on the whiteboard, and please make sure that you very thoroughly clean your brush today and clean your water cup as well.